Part 5. The Trick. A great ox was brought forth, the finest that had ever lived, its hide black as night and eyes that held an intelligence that suggested it understood its role in the drama about to unfold. It was massive, fed on ambrosia-touched grass, its blood running with hints of ichor that marked it as more than merely mortal. This was not just an animal, but a symbol, a representation of all the abundance that existence could offer. The killing was done by Prometheus himself, with a blade that had been forged in the first fire, sharp enough to cut between moments. The ox died without pain, its essence flowing back into the earth from which all things came, its sacrifice willingly given for the sake of the covenant being formed. The humans watched in fascination and horror as their creator butchered the magnificent animal with movements so precise they seemed choreographed by fate itself. But it was in the division that Prometheus's true cunning revealed itself. He separated the ox into two portions, but not equally, not obviously. The first portion he wrapped in the ox's own stomach, that gray-white organ that seemed repulsive to divine sensibilities. Within this unappealing package, he placed all the good meat, the tender cuts that would sustain and strengthen, the rich portions that carried the true value of the sacrifice. It looked, from the outside, like the worst possible offering, offensive to sight and smell, something that only the desperate would choose. The second portion he crafted with the artist's eye he had developed in creating humanity. He took the bones, white and clean, but ultimately inedible, and arranged them with careful precision. Over these, he spread the rich, glistening fat, sculpting it into a form that pleased the eye and promised satisfaction. It gleamed in the light of the divine assembly like a treasure, like something worthy of gods, though beneath the attractive surface lay nothing but emptiness. When he finished, two offerings lay before the assembly, one ugly but valuable, one beautiful but worthless. The symbolism was not lost on Prometheus, who saw in this division a representation of everything that would define the relationship between mortals and immortals. Appearance versus substance, immediate gratification versus long-term benefit, the superficial versus the essential. "Choose," Prometheus said to Zeus, his voice carrying no hint of the knowledge that burned within him, the foresight that showed him every possible outcome of this moment. "As king of gods and arbiter of this new covenant, choose which portion shall belong to the divine realm and which to the mortal." Zeus stood from his throne of lightning-fused glass and descended to examine the offerings. His divine sight could pierce through any deception. He could see through the fat to the bones beneath, through the stomach to the meat within. He knew exactly what Prometheus had done, understood the trick being played, but he also saw the trap within the trap, the opportunity this presented to teach both Prometheus and his precious humans a lesson about challenging the divine order. The other gods watched with interest as Zeus circled the two portions, his expression thoughtful, almost amused. He reached out with one hand toward the stomach-wrapped portion, and Prometheus held his breath. If Zeus chose the meat, the trick would fail, and humanity would be left with bones and fat, symbols of their worthlessness in the divine order. But Zeus's hand paused, withdrew, moved instead to the gleaming, fat-covered bones. "This one," Zeus declared, his voice containing thunder that had not yet sounded. "The gods choose this portion, beautiful and gleaming, worthy of immortal consumption. Let the mortals have the other, that ugly thing that suits their earthbound nature. The assembly erupted in laughter, the gods at what they perceived as Zeus's wisdom in choosing the obviously superior portion. The humans, those few who could see past the surface, in confused relief that they had received the sustaining meat. But Prometheus saw the rage building behind Zeus's smile, the fury of one who had been forced to participate in his own deception. Zeus lifted the fat-covered portion and made a show of presenting it to the assembled gods. Then, with deliberate theatricality, he peeled back the glistening fat to reveal the bare bones beneath. The laughter died. The silence that followed was electric with potential violence. "Behold," Zeus said, his voice now openly dangerous, "the cleverness of Prometheus. See how he seeks to deceive the gods themselves. Bones for the immortals, meat for his beloved mortals." He turned to Prometheus, and lightning played across his skin like living tattoos. "Did you think me blind, son of Iapetus? Did you think me fool enough not to see through your transparent scheming?" Prometheus met his gaze without flinching. "I think you are exactly as wise as you choose to be, Lord Zeus. You saw what there was to see and chose what you wished to choose. The choice was yours, freely made. If the outcome displeases you, perhaps the fault lies not in the offering, but in the choosing." It was perfectly stated, respectful enough to avoid open insult, true enough to be undeniable, subtle enough to make Zeus's rage seem petty. The thunder god could not strike down Prometheus for simply stating facts, not without appearing tyrannical before the assembly he had convened to establish his just rule. But Zeus's rage was not so easily deflected. He turned to the humans, these creatures that Prometheus had protected with his clever trick, and his smile was terrible to behold. "So be it," he declared. "The division stands. From this day forward, mortals shall keep the meat of their sacrifices, shall feast on the flesh while offering only bones and fat to the gods. But know this," and here his voice became cosmic, writing itself into the fundamental laws of reality. "You shall have no means to enjoy your portion. No fire shall you possess to cook your meat, no flame to warm your bodies or light your darkness. You shall have the better portion, but no way to make use of it. You shall eat your meat raw like the beasts you barely transcend, shall shiver in the cold that your thin skins cannot resist, shall cower in darkness when the sun abandons you each night." With a gesture, Zeus withdrew fire from the mortal realm. Every flame that had burned in the places where humans dwelt suddenly died. The warmth fled from their gathering places. The light vanished from their primitive hearths. Even the knowledge of how to make fire was torn from their minds, leaving only a vague sense of something missing, something essential that had been taken. The humans cried out in dismay, suddenly feeling the full weight of their mortality. Without fire, they were indeed little more than clever animals. The meat they had won through Prometheus's trick would rot without cooking. The cold that they had learned to keep at bay would creep back into their bones. The darkness they had begun to push back would reclaim their nights. "This is your justice?" Prometheus asked, his voice carrying a dangerous edge. "To punish those who had no part in the choosing? To inflict suffering on beings whose only crime is existence?" "This is consequence," Zeus replied coldly. "You sought to elevate them above their station, to give them privileges they have not earned. Now they have their meat, but no means to cook it. their victory but no way to celebrate it. Perhaps this will teach them, and you, the price of attempting to deceive the gods. The assembly began to disperse, the gods returning to their various domains, amused by the drama they had witnessed. The humans huddled together, already feeling the cold seeping into their bones. Their brief moment of triumph transformed into deeper despair than they had known before. They looked to Prometheus, their creator, their champion. But what could even he do against the will of Zeus? Prometheus stood alone as the divine assembly departed, watching his humans struggle with their new limitation. He saw them attempt to eat the raw meat and sicken. He saw them shiver as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. He saw the fear in their eyes as darkness approached without the comfort of flame to hold it at bay. But most of all, he saw their potential being strangled before it could flourish. Fire was not just warmth and light, it was the beginning of civilization itself. Without it, they could not forge metal, could not create beyond the most primitive level, could not gather in the evening to share stories and build culture. Zeus had not merely taken fire, he had taken the future Prometheus had envisioned for them. Standing there in the gathering dusk, Prometheus made a decision that he had seen coming from the moment he first shaped clay with conscious intent. He would steal fire from the gods themselves. He would bring to humanity the tool they needed, not just to survive, but to thrive. He would give them the means to eventually challenge the very order that sought to keep them prostrate. He knew the cost, had always known it. The chains awaited him, and the eagle, and the eternal agony. But he also knew what lay beyond that suffering. Generations of humans using fire to build, to create, to become more than Zeus could imagine. He saw cities illuminated against the night, forges creating wonders, hearts gathered around hearth fires, sharing the stories that would become civilization. The price would be paid, but first, the gift must be given. As the last of the gods departed Mycone, Prometheus began to plan. The theft would need to be perfect, the timing precise. Zeus would be watching, waiting for exactly this response. But Prometheus had advantages too. His foresight showed him the moment when divine attention would be elsewhere, when the paths to Olympus would be least guarded, when the sacred fire would be most vulnerable. But more than that, he had motivation that the gods could not understand. It was not defiance that drove him, not pride or rebellion. It was love, not the simple love of creator for creation, but something deeper. He loved humanity's potential, their capacity to become. He loved their imperfection that left room for growth. He loved their mortality that made each moment precious. The humans had retreated to their crude shelters, attempting to warm themselves with animal skins and body heat. Prometheus went to them in the darkness, moving through their camp like a promise not yet spoken. They looked at him with eyes that held accusation and hope in equal measure. He had made them, had elevated them, had caused them to be noticed by powers that might have otherwise ignored them. Was their suffering his fault? Was their salvation his responsibility? He touched each of them gently, a benediction and an apology combined. Into their minds, he whispered patience. Into their hearts, he placed renewed hope, that unreasonable, impossible hope that would sustain them through the dark night that was coming, for it would get worse before it got better. Zeus's rage would grow, and Pandora would come with her jar of sorrows. and generations would suffer for the gift Prometheus was about to give. But beyond all that suffering lay something extraordinary, a future where these weak, cold, frightened beings would build wonders that would make the gods themselves marvel. They would create art that captured beauty more perfectly than Aphrodite's form. They would compose music that would make Apollo weep. They would show courage that would shame Ares, wisdom that would surprise Athena, love that would outlast Zeus's lightning. All of it beginning with a single spark stolen from heaven. Prometheus looked up at Olympus, that mountain that touched the sky, where the gods feasted and laughed, secure in their superiority. Somewhere up there, fire burned eternal, the fire that had existed since the first moment of creation, the fire that the gods hoarded as their exclusive property. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, when the moment was right, when the futures aligned, he would climb that mountain. He would take what was forbidden. He would bring light to darkness, warmth to cold, possibility to despair. The trick at Mecone had been just the beginning. The meat and bones had been symbols, representations of a deeper truth, that the gods, for all their power, could be outmaneuvered by wisdom and foresight. Zeus had chosen the bones wrapped in fat, had taken appearance over substance, had proven that even divine sight could be clouded by pride and expectation. Now Prometheus would exploit that pride, that assumption of superiority. He would steal fire not through force. No Titan's strength could overcome Olympian guards, but through cunning, through knowing exactly when and how to act. He would take from the gods not just flame, but the monopoly on advancement, the exclusive claim to the tools of civilization. As dawn approached, bringing another day of cold and struggle for his humans, Prometheus finalized his plan. He knew where the sacred fire burned, in Zeus's own hearth, tended by Hestia, that gentle goddess who understood the true value of flame. He knew the paths to reach it, the guards to avoid, the moments when divine attention would be focused elsewhere. He knew the fennel stalk that would hold the stolen fire, that hollow plant that could preserve flame without being consumed by it. Most importantly, he knew the moment of action was approaching with the inexorability of fate. Not fate as the gods understood it, blind and immutable, but fate as Prometheus saw it, the convergence of choice and consequence, the point where potential crystallized into actuality. The humans stirred with the dawn, facing another day without fire. They looked at the cold meat they could not properly consume, felt the chill that animal skins could not fully defeat, saw the long darkness that awaited them when the sun set again. Some despaired, others raged, but a few, those in whom hope burned strongest, began to plan, to adapt, to search for solutions. It was these few that Prometheus watched most carefully. They were the ones who would make best use of his gift, who would take fire and transform it into something more than warmth and light. They would become the inventors, the discoverers, the ones who pushed boundaries not because they could, but because they must. They carried in them the seed of everything humanity would become, not in spite of their limitations, but because of them. The trick at Mecone had established the pattern. The gods would always choose appearance over substance, would always assume their superiority made them wise. And humans, forced to accept the portion the gods rejected, would learn to find value in what seemed worthless, to transform the discarded into the essential. But first, they needed fire, and Prometheus would get it for them, though the cost would echo through eternity. He stood as the sun rose fully, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink that reminded him of the forge where the Cyclopes had crafted Zeus's thunderbolts. Somewhere in that sunrise was the moment he had been waiting for, the perfect alignment of circumstances that would allow a titan to steal from gods. Soon, very soon, the fire that would change everything was waiting, and Prometheus, who had thought ahead from the beginning, was ready to claim it. End of Act 1. The Seeds of Rebellion.